Good evening. I want to thank you for coming out to the Steam event tonight. Thanks for, got a couple of friendly faces we've seen before. First, I want to say thanks to the folks at TSMQs for offering this space. Please, feel free to grab something to eat or drink. Maria's here to take care of you tonight, and she's terrific. The way the evening is going to go is we're going to have about a 20-minute presentation by Alan Boyle. We'll get there in a second. Then we'll have a 10-minute break. The restrooms are down the hall here if you need it. And then we'll go into a Q&A, pretty interesting, I hope, question and answer session. Alan Boyle, I sometimes refer to him as the guy with the crystal ball because he's looking at current technology, and I'll be asking him some questions later about what the future looks like. So, some of the things that we want to, some administrative stuff is take care of the surveys on your table, if you wouldn't mind that. And then I'll be collecting on each of the table. There's raffle tickets. If you could fill those out, that would be great. We've got some fun stuff. We have 2 fun novelty prizes. We always give one out that always relates to the speaker, and then a $25 gift certificate at Amazon. So pretty good odds. I want to point out Gwen Boyle in the back. She is our Steam event operator. She is the one who's putting these events together. This is the 4th one that we've had here at TSMQs, and we're on 3 over at another location in Bellevue. So starting to gain some momentum, so thank you guys for coming out. Anything else?
The event is being filmed.
The event is being filmed. Sorry about that. Yeah, and that will be posted on her website and on YouTube in the next couple of days. If you are doing anything with social media, the Twitter address and the Facebook address are the Steam event. So you go pass that around. Okay. Without anything else, I'm not going to talk too much about Alan Boyle's professional background. He's going to talk about that. I'm going to say that I've known Alan for over 10 years now. He has been, what's wrong with that? He's been just this die-hard advanced technology person. He's been focused on advanced technology for a very long time. I met him through connections in my space projects. But he writes on robots and space and energy systems and computing systems. Fair amount of time looking up in the sky as a sky watcher, as a personal hobby. Asking about Pluto, he had a lot to do with that. And without any further ado, thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, thanks so much to SteamVent for hosting me, and thanks for the introduction, Michael. This is an intimate group, and so I feel like we can be intimate with each other, in a sense, that we don't need to feel like it's a real formal presentation, but I did bring a few slides just to introduce how I got to where I got. And I've been in newspapers since I was in junior high. I grew up in Iowa, went to college, got a graduate degree in journalism, worked at newspapers in Cincinnati and Spokane and Seattle. I was the foreign editor at the Seattle PI and had the opportunity to go to Moscow and Chisinau and Kiev and cover the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that was great fun as foreign editor. And when I was foreign editor, there was this new thing that was coming out called the internet, and everyone was trying to figure out what good the internet was going to be. And so we found it to be pretty useful in contacting my colleagues in Russia after we had our meetings in Russia, well, how do we keep in touch? Well, we can send email, or we can use news groups to get information back and forth. And so I became increasingly interested in online media and the promise that it had for international development. And so I helped out a few organizations, UNESCO and the World Association of Newspapers, trying to figure out how this technology could help journalists. And I felt like I really wanted to get involved in online media, get in on the ground floor. And so they had this new thing that was called MSNBC that was being set up in our neck of the woods, that it's a joint venture between Microsoft and NBC News, and they were going to kind of merge the worlds of television and the internet. And so this is the front page from the very first day, July 15th, 1996, and that was the first day that I worked at MSNBC. And our big story was a special report on the Clinton juggernaut. And back then it was the Bill Clinton juggernaut. Nowadays people talk about the Hillary Clinton juggernaut. But we had a lot of firsts in terms of online media, just in terms of really helping to take it mainstream. We were among the first mainstream news organizations to have a blog, and mine was the first blog. Through the years, the design changed. This is from September 11th, 2001. That was a relatively new design that we brought in, and there was a lot going on that front page that day. And just there were many days when we would be working 20 hours, you know, try to get some sleep and come back. By that time, I had switched over to the science beat because there were a couple of things that happened in 1997 that really got people interested in what was going on, particularly in space. There was the Mir space station collision with a cargo ship, and people nearly got killed in space, and it was almost like the Gravity movie. And there was also the 1997 Mars Pathfinder landing on Mars. I remember the day that happened, it was July 4th, 1997. And I was in Roswell, New Mexico, because I had done a series of stories about the anniversary of the Roswell UFO incident. So here we were with all these people dressed up like aliens and you know, silver suits walking around, and here was some real life science that was going on. And so MSNBC had been kind of having a special TV coverage of the Roswell anniversary, but it quickly turned to the Mars landing, and people really discovered that there was such an appeal. I mean, I remember NASA was just so thrilled that there were something like 1 million page views on that day, and it was really, for a lot of people, that was the day that people realized that science news had a great appeal on the internet, and that they were almost made for each other, because science presents so much great information, so much great imagery from space missions, and the internet provides so many ways to get that word out to people and to have people share the fantastic images and the fantastic developments that come from science. So this is just another redesign and another horror in 2005. We've been through about 6 or 7 redesigns. There's another big traffic day. And our design is progressing. This is in 2012, and so this is just before another big event in our news organization. I mentioned that Microsoft and NBC had created a joint venture to present news on television and on the internet through MSNBC. And in 2005, NBC decided to take back Microsoft's share of the cable TV channel, and so they operated that exclusively as an NBC thing. But Microsoft retained its share of the website, and so even here it was a 50-50 joint venture between Microsoft and NBC. But the partners in the marriage started to have their little fights, and in this year, 2012, they got a divorce. And Microsoft sold its share of MSNBC back to NBC News. And so now I'm strictly an NBC News employee, and I work for NBCnews.com. And we've gone through a couple of different designs, even while even after NBC took over the website operation. So it's been quite a trip, and it used to be that science news was part of the health section in the very beginning, and then they broke off science and it was part of the news section, and then it became part of the technology section, and they called it technology and science, and until NBC took over, and then they decided to break apart technology and the science section. And so really, for the first time, science has its own section in the website. And that's what I deal with. There are other people on our team who also work with science news as well as technology news, but I'm strictly involved in subjects like space exploration, space science, what's going to happen with the successor to the space shuttle, what's NASA going to do next, what about these statues in Greece that they've uncovered, these 2,300-year-old statues of the caryatids thought to come from the tomb of someone, some high personage from the reign of Alexander the Great, but nobody knows who this person is yet. Could it actually be Alexander? Probably not, but they haven't totally excluded that yet. I've been dealing with dinosaurs. There were some big dinosaur discoveries like Dreadnoughtus, the biggest sauropod ever found, and a weird dinosaur called Spinosaurus, who they've just found out would swim as well as waddle on land, kind of like a duck. And also science policy. Every once in a while I'll get involved in the climate debate, although we have other people, my colleagues at NBC News, delve a lot more deeply into the climate issue, or it might be how the political campaign is going to shape up. What are the science issues that are going to come to the fore there? When stem cells were the big campaign debate, I would be doing a lot of writing about stem cells. So there's a lot of variety in the job, which is good. And hi. And so I don't have any trouble really keeping myself busy. There's a lot. There's so much out there that I can't handle it all. We do have partners, Live Science and Space.com, who provide us stories. I'll just say today, when I got up, I thought I was going to be doing a story about this new fossil organism that they found that they think was one of the first multicellular organisms, and they found this 600-million-year-old fossil. And I was getting ready to write about that. It was new research that was going to be in Nature. And then I got an email from my editor about this Indian Mars probe that arrived last night. And I was up until, I was working until 10 or 11 o'clock trying to get the latest information about the Mars orbiter mission, orbital insertion into Mars orbit. And so my editor said, hey, they're really interested in this story, and they want to know why it is that India can get an orbiter in Mars orbit for $74 million, and it took NASA $671 million to get their orbiter in there. And so I kind of put aside the 600-million-year-old fossils and started to work gathering information and talking with people about, the economics of Mars exploration. And so I wrote that story up, and then I was able to pick up the 600-million-year-old fossil story from Live Science and put that on the site. I didn't write it. I just produced that story from from our partners at Live Science. And then there was another story I worked on about some researchers at the University of Rochester who have developed a new kind of invisibility cloaking device. Invisibility cloak, it's really an optical trick, but it is interesting how they did it. It's like a magic trick. You know, you can put something between two lenses and it kind of disappears when you're looking through the lens. And so they provide the instructions so that anybody can build an invisibility cloak. It's not going to be anything you can kind of take to the bank and patent, but it's something you can have fun with in your physics lab. You know, I imagine kids would love to do that. So that was another part of what I did, and just tried to keep up with a few more stories, and all of a sudden it's 6 or 7 o'clock and I got to come here. So keeps me busy. So I think, Michael, you're going to try to provide a little more fuel for the fire on that whole issue.
Sure. Yeah, if anybody needs to take a break, we can take a break. If you want us to kind of move on and start jumping into questions, what do you guys like to do? Discussion. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I was going to take your first question about the technology.
Yeah, so I would like to know, you take a look at this huge variety of ideas, concepts, systems. Some of them are completely wackadoo, like my stuff.
Like yours.
But some of it's, some of it's really good. So how do you start to decide? I mean, of course the editor has some influence there, but how do you start to decide, this is a good idea, this is a story that has legs, and then what does the future look like? What does the future look like in your eyes? Maybe look out 5, 10, 15 years, the kind of technologies you're starting to see sprinkled out there, coalescing into a movement. What do you think the future looks like?
One of the things that I found out is that I'm not very good at predicting the future, because I tried to do this back in 2007 or so, that I was at an award ceremony in my home state of Iowa, and the theme was, what are the technologies of the future? And I thought that ethanol was going to be pretty hot. And so, but actually ethanol did turn out to make an impact. You see a lot of states starting to integrate that into their fuel infrastructure. So I think that you always think there's going to be some sort of aha moment or something that is instantly going to change the world. Maybe the iPhone would be one of those technologies that I never saw coming, the revolution in smartphones. But I think a lot of the changes that transform society get a really slow start. Actually, we were talking about how many of the smartphones that got so much of the attention 10 years ago are still around, and it turns out maybe there's one. Right. So with that in mind, that it's probably a foolish thing to do, I guess I'll try to take a crack at it. And I think one of the things that we see a lot is the sort of thing that Michael has been involved with crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and the democratization of science. And Michael's Kickstarter effort to try to do a space elevator experiment is one example of that. Another example is the Hive Bio kind of citizens biotech effort that is going on in Seattle. You might want to get yourself up to speed on that if you're interested in biotech, where they kind of take people in and show them the ropes in terms of how DNA analysis works, how you do the sorts of things in biology that people are able to do nowadays. And just projects like Galaxy Zoo, and there's one called Planet Hunters, where people have banded together to try to search through databases to find interesting twists in the data that lead to real discoveries. And I think that I won't be proven far wrong if I say that that trend is going to continue. In space exploration, we did have this Indian effort, and one of the secrets to the success of the Indian Mars orbiter is that so much of the technology for space exploration is starting to come down in price. That a lot of people are getting into what are known as CubeSats. And you're probably already thinking about some sort of CubeSat project to take on, where these are miniaturized, standardized satellite boxes. They're 10 centimeters on a side, 4 inches on a side. And universities can put them together and build their own satellites. And so, well, what are you going to do? A university doesn't have a space program to put this satellite into orbit. But what's happening is that commercial ventures are starting to crop up, like nanoracks that are arranging for these CubeSats to be shipped up to the International Space Station. And then what the people on the International Space Station do is that they load them into a spring-loaded launcher and then just push them out into space. If you've ever seen pictures of these little CubeSats going off with the curving Earth in the background, it's really you know, a glimpse of the future. And some people are even talking about being able to adapt CubeSats to go on interplanetary space exploration missions. And so that's another area where the democratization and the citizen element of science is really coming to the fore. In energy, Ray Kurzweil, famous futurist who hopes he'll be able to live forever, has said for years that solar power is going to transform our economy, that by 2030 solar power will make this whole question of where are we going to get our future energy irrelevant. And I hope he's right on that. I would love to see that golden age. People like Elon Musk, who have backed a company called Solar City, as well as SpaceX and Tesla, are working to kind of make that dream happen. Even in Seattle, a lot of people are trying to install solar equipment, and that gets into a big political issue too, that when you're able to sell power back to the utility, how is that economic equation going to work in the future when everyone is producing their own power? Will the people who are not able to produce their power, will they be turned into energy have-nots? That it's not a straightforward everything is wonderful issue. There are going to be a lot of political frictions that develop as new technologies come into the application. You know, the availability of cheap energy will also transform transportation, and so I've written a lot about plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and in fact, when the Chevy Volt came out, one of my most memorable adventures on the road was when GM said, "Hey, how would you like to come with us and get behind the wheel of a Chevy Volt and drive it down to San Francisco?" And so a photographer and I took him up on the offer, and we drove the car down there and kind of chronicled the problems along the way, you know, that depending on how you drive, you really don't get all that much out of the electricity before it switches over back to the gas. And I remember we stayed overnight in Ashland, Oregon, because that's kind of halfway between Seattle and San Francisco. And so one of the issues was, well, where are we going to plug in the car? We're staying at this hotel. Where's the plug-in? We're not going to plug it in and run a cord all the way out from our hotel room. And so in the twilight, I was running around the exterior of the hotel trying to find where there was a power outlet that I could plug my car into. And my colleague, the photographer, got some great pictures of me just running around with this power cord, you know, trying to find the future of transportation. Another issue that came up with that was I had written about how when we parked the car at Microsoft, you know, we worked on the Microsoft campus, I would find a power outlet somewhere in the parking garage, you know, down deep in the depths of this parking garage on the Microsoft campus. And I got a lot of angry email from people who were saying, "You're stealing power from your employer, that's terrible, you should be ashamed of yourself." Well, you just have to kind of let that stuff roll off you, you know. For one thing, my employer wants me to write this story about the challenges that are coming up, and here's a perfect example of one of the challenges that people are going to face. Now, when just last weekend, I went to a Walgreens, and they've got a spot set aside in the parking lot where you can plug in your electric vehicle and recharge it while you're at the drugstore.
Did you see the piece recently about the difference between plugging in on the east side versus the west side?
No,
if you
no.
plug your car in over in Bellevue, most of that energy is coming from a dirty coal plant in Montana.
Oh my gosh.
You put more carbon into the air than you would have if you just
Huh.
used a gas-powered car.
But in Seattle, it's more hydro?
It's hydropower.
Wow, who'd have thought it? So if I ever get an electric car, I'll remember that. I live in Bellevue, but I'll make sure to plug my car in the parking lot in Seattle. So I don't know if that gives you enough to chew on.
You just talked about solar, you talked about transportation, crowdsourced science, biosciences,
Space.
Space, of course. Anything else on your radar? I mean, I think those are pretty big elements.
I guess the only thing is that I do cover archaeology and paleontology too, and the thing that I'm getting ready to write about, it'll probably be the day after tomorrow that I write about this, is how imaging, creation of virtual replicas of ancient bones and ancient sites are really becoming a great tool for archaeologists and paleontologists. And so when you think about how you interpret the past, it's great to realize that high technology, you know, the future of 3D imaging is going to make it possible to get a better get a better sense of how dinosaurs move, for example, like with this Dreadnoughtus dinosaur, the sauropod. They have enough of the bones that they can create a robot dinosaur that they can use to kind of check their preconceptions of how sauropods moved, and maybe this bone doesn't work if it's like this, but it works if it's like this. And so you can manipulate things in 3D, turn it into a model with 3D printing, and then test out your plans. You don't have to kind of guess at how these bones go together anymore. So I guess that's the only other thing I would say is a cool thing. And the idea of 3D printing and creation of actual objects in a virtual 3D space will make those things more accessible to regular folks. Already, museums are able to more easily print out 3D reconstructions of dinosaurs that they can put in their museums, and that makes things more accessible to museum goers. I imagine there will be a time when you can kind of go into an Oculus Rift booth and maybe walk on Mars the way that 2020 rover sees it, because of all the great data that these rovers have sent back to Earth to construct a virtual Mars in cyberspace. Or you'll be able to get up close to a dinosaur and see how Jurassic Park really worked in virtual space. So,
what about robotics? You touched on a little, it's on the edges, but you're not really focusing on that. Is that correct?
Yeah. I used to focus more on robotics. The way that our team has been organized now, There are other people who deal more with robotics and drones. Those are two big things that are really transforming things right now, just in terms of soft robotics. One of the little stories that recently came to light is this robo octopus that could swim through the water because it reproduced the way that an octopus moves, not with clanky, robot motions, but with soft, undulating movements. And another development that just came up in the last couple of days is robo-cloth. The idea that you could have a fabric that you wrap around something and then you're able to control the movement of that thing by using sort of an actuator system that's built into the fabric. And so I was imagining being able to make one of those balloon dogs and then wrap it in robo fabric and start controlling it, get it walking across the sidewalk.
I've actually played with some robo rope that you could toss it across a stream and it can find its way to a tree, wrap itself around the tree, and then you've got a rope to the other side. So
that's scary, man. Don't let that rope come after you.
No, it was creepy. I was standing in the. This is a tech from Carnegie Mellon, and they actually have the thing wrapped around my leg, and this is a rope that's probably like that thick around. And it felt like I would imagine it.
That would kind of freak me out.
I was like, this is not comfortable. I am not having fun.
Right.
Okay, so those are the last of my questions. Let's toss it out to the rest of you folks. What do you guys want to hear? Yeah.
Well, hi, Alan.
Yeah.
James Pura. Nice to finally see you in person after talking to you so long. I have so many questions, but I will start with asking you what got you so involved and interested in the commercial space industry, and kind of what's your personal connection to it, because everybody has kind of like the personal twist to it, and what your hopes are for the future of it.
Yeah, that's a little hard for me to reconstruct now how I got into that, but I think I was just covering the space effort, that you would cover NASA and even back in, actually it was the X Prize, that this guy named Peter Diamandis kind of came to the Microsoft campus, and he had this scheme where, he was going to work out a deal with Visa where you could build up your credit card points and someday use that to buy a space flight. And he had this crazy idea that he was going to give $10 million away to the first private venture that was able to send a spaceship higher up than 100 kilometers to the boundary of space. And so I guess that's kind of my connection. That's because I had been covering space, and because Peter knew that. I think he was trying to kind of get me on board, and I guess it worked because I've covered what he's been up to for years and years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I remember writing about that. Space. I think the headline was "Space Odysseys for the Rest of Us," and throughout those years, there was always someone who was going to have a spaceship ready for all of us in the next couple of years, whether it was the Conestoga or Kistler's rocket plane or whatever. And so there was one time when I wrote that there was a 2-year rule that the future of personal spaceflight is always 2 years away. And that rule has held for more than a decade. But we'll see. We're hoping that with Virgin Galactic and X-Corps, we'll be able to get beyond that 2-year rule sometime in the next 2 years. But I guess that's the story. Where do I see it going? I'm really optimistic. I feel as if There are a lot of people who have fallen by the wayside, a lot of people I got to know really well, kind of were going to revolutionize space flight, and we were all going to go up, and then they had to pull back and go on to other pursuits. And so maybe I should learn to be a little less gullible about it. And I think I have. I think that it's really come down to money, that in order to do this, you do have to have a lot of money. And I guess Richard Branson has a lot of money, and Elon Musk now has a lot of money. And he spent a lot of money trying to get SpaceX going, but now it's very successful. And so it gives me hope that there really will be a transformation. And between that and the CubeSat revolution, I think that the space and economy will become more of a visible factor in our lives. It's already an invisible factor, thanks to all the satellites that we've got going on. Everything that we're doing tonight could not be possible without satellite technology. And so I think the next step is for people to have a personal connection with the space environment, whether they see Sarah Brightman go up and do a song in space, or whether they are part of a satellite project that makes a little bit of money but also blazes a new frontier. I feel that's a possible path for actually bringing that bright future into reality. Yeah. Oh.
Do you have any metrics regarding your readership?
A lot of metrics, yeah. More than I really want to know, frankly, and more than I can wrap my head around. But usually, the only things that I see are what's going on instantaneously, like what stories are doing really well just at that moment. There might be 100 people, there might be 1,000 people, there might be 10,000 people who are looking at a particular story at the moment. And then every day I'll get a report about what the top stories are in terms of page views and visits and Facebook reach. Recently, a lot of people have tried to kind of keep an eye on what's happening Facebook reach on a week-to-week basis. And so you get a sense of what stories do really well. Last week, it was a story about Richard III, that the people who dug up the bones of Richard III a couple of years ago have had enough time to study closely what happened to those bones, and they could reconstruct the story of how Richard III died. And anything about Richard III does really well on the web. So that was one of the top stories of the week. Yeah?
The reason I asked, Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Yeah?
you read his obviously, and as a journalist, he's been, kind of on the edge regarding journalistic integrity.
Uh-huh.
So, I was kind of curious about that as well.
Uh-huh. Oh, you're talking about the whole idea of what he says in his lectures, and there's been a recent, been some recent back and forth about whether he is kind of making up some of the anecdotes that, I don't know. I hope I am not making up anything right now, but let's see. Neil and I, of course, have been on opposite sides of the Pluto debate. I think Michael referred to Pluto, that I had covered the whole debate over Pluto, and when the IAU ruled that it's a dwarf planet and it's not one of the 8 big planets, I thought, okay, that's settled, and yeah, that's the way it's going to be. And then I came to know some of the people on the other side of the debate, people who are involved in this New Horizons mission to Pluto that's going to have its big flyby next year. And they kind of opened my eyes a little bit. The view that I have now is that you should have a more expansive view of the universe. You shouldn't be trying to exclude things from categories and say that, well, you know, these things are, you know, the top things to be thinking about in the solar system, and these other things you shouldn't have to worry about. You know, they don't make a difference. Well, that kind of ran against the grain for me, and I think that there's a scientific argument to be made for being more inclusive in how you classify objects in the solar system and beyond. And so I wrote a book about that called The Case for Pluto. And so I did bring a couple copies. I think, Michael, you wanted a copy, so we can give away one of those copies as part of the raffle if we want to. So, of course, Neil has had more success with his book, The Pluto Files, and that turned into a PBS series. And so we have to rib each other whenever we see each other. It's every once in a while, it's at one of these scientific conferences. But I think we both kind of keep open minds about that. So I guess the bottom line is that I'm not going to say anything against Neil because I want to kind of keep that relationship going, and I have a natural bias to think that he's got it in for Pluto, you know. So I have to keep that impulse down, and so you won't hear me say anything bad about him, except that he probably should change his mind about Pluto and, you know, see the light.
I think Ellen Stern would agree with you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a question which was hoping that you would get a little bit nostalgic for a moment. You've been covering a variety of scientific topics for as long as I've known you, which was 7 years.
Uh-huh.
And, you've probably done it a long time before that as well. Of all of the
Another 11 years before that.
11 years,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
18 years. Of the 18 years you've covered the variety of topics, what were your most, there's stories that you cover that are like, all right, this is going to be a cool story to publish, it's going to get a lot of good readership, and then it'll be forgotten for a day. What were your favorite epic stories that you knew when this was going to happen, this was going to be just an amazing story, you really took your time and you were really proud of it?
Well, I would say the flight of Spaceship One. We've been talking about commercial space flight and the X Prize. These folks, you know, Burt Rutan and Paul Allen, who got together and decided that they were going to try to win this $10 million and had these great test pilots right from the pages of The Right Stuff who flew that. And for me, what I treasure is the camaraderie with fellow writers, and you lose that a little bit in this internet age where everybody is kind of just looking into their computer terminal, and there's not any interaction with your peers. And I really valued being with my peers in Mojave for Spaceship One, and by the way, being with them at the Cape for shuttle launches. There was a real, you know, it's what I imagine the White House press corps would be like, where you have this competition, but you also have people helping each other. And I think that human experience of a lot of people covering a story together, and after the story is done, going out and having, like, I remember after every launch of Spaceship One, it was a tradition to go to the nearby watering hole and have a martini. And so I can still taste that martini, and that adds to the joy that I feel when I reflect about that experience, which is almost exactly 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years ago, a week from Saturday.
Yeah, I have a
Sure.
comment. I think what passes for space technology has been a massive disappointment. I remember people walked on the moon in 1969.
Yeah.
We're nowhere near that now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is because what passes for technology is fluff,
Mm.
mainly computer fluff.
Right.
You know, Peter Thiel, the famous, the original venture capitalist,
Mhm.
what he said about technology. He remembers growing up in the 1960s, reading popular science and whatnot. He said, we wanted flying cars, and we got 140 characters.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what
Uh-huh.
passes for technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And recently I read two stories. One was about, you know what ITER is? It's
ITER, yeah,
it's
yeah.
used to solve the world's energy problems by nuclear fusion,
Mm-hmm.
which, if it worked, and granted it's tough, would instantly solve our energy problems. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sunk a grand total of $20 billion into that before governments have started to pull back, say it's too expensive. Meanwhile, Facebook spends $19 billion on WhatsApp.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
an app that lets you look at kitty, pictures of your cat.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on what passes for
Yeah,
technology and
yeah,
what's out
yeah.
there?
I'm starting to get a lot of thoughts bubbling up about that. One of the, I think there are lots of threads that I could pull from that. One is why things, why we had this grand adventure in the 60s and 70s with the space effort. And of course, it wasn't really about space science. It was about winning the Cold War. And it turned out they spent, what today, there would be no political will to spend that much on the space program because back then it was like we were fighting for our lives, and this was the high frontier in the battle of the superpowers between the US and the Soviets. And so Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and all that group were actually Cold Warriors of the first degree. And that's a big reason why it seemed so disappointing when the war was won. That we didn't follow through because with the Nixon administration there wasn't the political will for that. We do have, even now, the technology is there. It's technologically possible to get to Mars, but you have to have the political will and the ability to solve some of the little problems, like how are you going to have artificial gravity so that when someone gets to Mars, they don't, their bones just don't fall apart, and how are you going to avoid them, keep them from being fried by the radiation between Earth and Mars. But there are other problems like Ebola that are just now coming onto the radar screen, and Ebola is another example of something that they could have solved more quickly if there was enough concern and political will about it. But now that thousands of people are dying, they're finally getting the political will to find a vaccine for that. So there's a little bit of a parallel for me. It's not only that there's so much fluff out there. I think there's always a lot of fluff surrounding what the heart of a good technology is. Another thread that I was going to pull out is what Elon Musk said to me a couple of years ago. He said, if I just wanted to make money, I would have done a Facebook app. That you have to have people who are concerned about more than just making money. And thank God we've got some people like that who are able to kind of push the frontier, whether it's the frontier in biotechnology or the frontier in space or energy. So Elon Musk is no saint, but he's definitely one of the thought leaders, and he seems to have phenomenally good luck and a phenomenally strong vision that keeps him going. And I think if we have more people like that, we're going to be in good shape.
He sold PayPal, what, at 19
Yeah.
for $20 billion?
Right. And then, what he wanted to do is make humanity a multi-planet species. And so that is, he wants to die on Mars, but not necessarily on the way down.
So how does a story get your attention? Like, how do you say, this is really news, and this is fluff, as you just described it? How do you make those decisions?
I think it's an evolutionary process. When there's something that's first introduced, you get really excited about it. Like somebody says, hey, I've got a way to use bacteria to turn wastewater into hydrogen. And this is going to revolutionize energy because we'll go to a hydrogen economy and we'll have hydrogen cars and everything is going to be wonderful. And so I did write that story a couple times, when people came out with this technology that they thought, oh, it's going to be really great. But then you find out, well, there's kind of a problem with it, that sure, technically it works, but it doesn't scale up, or you need really expensive components to do this. And so a lot of these technologies that come up, I get really excited, and then once I go through it a couple times, you know, somebody else comes up and says, hey, I've got a great way to make hydrogen from wastewater. The bar is set a lot higher for that. So I think that happens a fair amount, that you start having to do a little bit more reality checking. And often, as I said before, it does come down to money, that people have a good idea, but then that good idea has to have the support of someone who can really, you know, pull it together and bring it to market.
Are you familiar with the efforts to sort of suck carbon out of the atmosphere? I mean, this is what I would consider big science. They're really expensive. The stuff that really would change.
Like sequestration,
Yeah, exactly.
and then there's another scheme that turns carbon dioxide into plastic
Well, they've got
that
to
we've
have
written
steam
about.
Put in these giant nets into
Uh-huh.
the atmosphere. Literally
Well,
giant.
you know, it sounds good, but those technologies are really going to be kind of incremental a little bit. That I think people have said, and this is what I believe about technologies for carbon sequestration or carbon conversion, that there's not going to be one magic bullet. You might need 1,000 magic bullets, and then you might also need some policy changes or lifestyle changes to solve that problem. You know, there are other people at NBC who follow the climate issue a lot more closely than I do. So that's if you're talking about what the next SpaceX supply flight is going to do, I'm your guy. But if you're wondering what's going to happen with the successor to the Kyoto Protocol, there might be somebody else who can more easily steer you in the right direction.
SpaceX just have a failure?
SpaceX had a test prototype for a reusable rocket called the F9R that failed on August 24th or so. What they're doing is that they're trying to develop a technology so that rockets can do what they do in the cartoons, where they fly themselves up and then they fly themselves back and set down. And so SpaceX is testing this in Texas. They call it F9R, the Falcon, or F9er, the Falcon 9 reusable. And so what they do is that they have a test rocket that goes up and then it comes back down. And in this case, they had it go up, but then there was a sensor problem that kind of got it off course, and they had to press the button to destroy it. And so that kind of caused a little bit of worry in some people's minds about how reliable the Falcon 9s are that launch things to the space station and launch these multi-million-dollar satellites into geosynchronous orbit. But the investigation determined that the sensor system that was faulty isn't really used in that way for the Falcon 9 production model. And so they finally, actually Elon delayed the following Falcon 9 launch a couple of times just to make absolutely sure that they had tracked down the problem. You mentioned ITER and the fusion effort as well, and I did go to the ITER site in 2007 when it was just a big flat, you know, expanse of ground that they were waiting to do construction on. And so my sense is that the challenges of fusion power are so great that solar power is probably going to kind of make that question moot. There might be a role for fusion because fusion is a constant supply. If you get it figured out, you can have a fusion reactor keep running whether it's rain or shine, whether the wind is blowing or not, which, you know, that's a challenge for solar, that you have to have a good battery technology in order to store the power that you generate with solar. But it's really turned out to be very difficult to get fusion power going. And even if ITER is successful, and it's a good bet, it's just a matter of scaling up things. And when you scale up things, sometimes the process doesn't work the way you think it should when you see what's happening at a smaller scale. And so I think that even if ITER works the way they think it will, then there's the issue of how do you commercialize that. And it is going to be probably 20 or 30 or 40 years before they're able to kind of turn the corner on that and figure out how to create a commercially viable fusion facility. But I think it'll be, once they get it figured out, it will be part of the energy mix. But my sense or my hope is that solar power will get us out of the energy jam that we're finding ourselves in.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock.
Wow.
Going by very quickly, so it always does. That's kind of how these events go. I was going to say one more question, so if you got one more. But I was going to say, I want to make sure everybody's got your raffle tickets put up, so I'm going to pass a hat here in a second. We're going to take one more question. Did you want to? Oh, you have one? Well.
Ah, okay, Gwen, fire away.
So we've talked a lot about the space that you report on, which is kind of where humanity is going in the future of what's coming. But you said you also report on archaeology and paleontology, and so I'm curious if you chose to report on both of them, or if you were assigned NBC just said you get this and you get this. And I have a feeling you probably chose, and
Yeah.
I want to know why.
I've been kind of, I mean, the job has its ups and downs, but one thing where I've been lucky is that I have been able to pick my shots to a great degree. You know, there are some times when the editor says, hey, we want a story about such and such, and maybe I'm not real excited about such and such, but I'll start to do the story, and then I do get excited, you know. Every story that you write about a new subject is like leaping into the unknown, and so you just don't know whether you're going to be able to really make sense out of a new frontier. But I'm just fascinated by the life of the past, whether it's factual or fictional. Like I can hardly wait for Game of Thrones to start up again. Just the way that society organized itself and the artifacts that attach themselves to a culture, whether it's Maya culture or Egyptian or medieval, is just fascinating to me. And so I've been lucky enough to be able to kind of grab that and put it in my little bag of tricks.
Do you have any idea kind of in the future societies, looking back on today's age, any idea what they'll take from how we live today?
I think they'll say, I can't believe how wasteful that society was, and I can't believe that you would just, chop down a plant and then throw it in what they called a fireplace and light it on fire, and that was supposed to be a fun thing to do. So that's about the only thing I got right now.
What's that?
Are you a pessimist or an optimist?
Optimist always. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, to answer your question earlier, on the stories that he's done, he's very thorough on fact checking.
And optimistic.
Yeah, and optimistic. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much
Thank you.
for.
Let's go down.
Yeah. Thank you.